AITA for blaming my nephew for using my credit card without my permission. I have always been the type of person who doesn't check my bank statements too closely. I know, that is a terrible habit, but I usually glance at them, see the expected charges, and move on. I live a pretty routine life, and my spending habits are predictable, so nothing ever really jumps out at me. But recently, something did. I noticed a PlayStation charge that I definitely did not make. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to be annoying. At first, I figured it must have been some sort of mistake, a double charge or a small subscription fee I had overlooked. But something about it didn't sit right with me. So, for the first time in way too long, I sat down and went through my bank statements for the past year. And what I found made my stomach drop. There were over 100 charges from PlayStation. Not 4. Not 10. Over 100. I am not a huge gamer. I own a PlayStation, sure, and I have 2 accounts, but in the entire past year, I had made exactly 4 legitimate purchases. 4. Yet, my bank statements showed charges totaling around $1,500. My mind started racing. Someone had my credit card information. Someone had been using my money for months, and I had been blissfully unaware. I did the first thing any rational person would do. I reached out to the only people I knew who had kids that played PlayStation. My siblings. Specifically, my brother and sister, who both have kids who are into gaming. I wasn't accusatory. I wasn't rude. I just asked if there was any chance their kids had used my card for purchases before I called my bank to dispute everything. Both of them immediately denied it. They assured me their kids always asked before making purchases and that there was no way my card was attached to their accounts. They were so confident that I actually started to doubt myself. Maybe it really was some kind of fraud, some scammer who had gotten my details. So, I went ahead and called both PlayStation and my bank. My bank was surprisingly helpful. They were able to charge back the most recent few months' worth of transactions, and the rest was placed under investigation. PlayStation, on the other hand, was a nightmare to deal with, but I did my due diligence, explained the situation, and thought that was the end of it. I had done what I needed to do. I had protected my finances, and now it was up to the bank and PlayStation to sort out the rest. Then, a few days later, I got a panicked call from my teenage nephew. His PlayStation account had been permanently banned. He was freaking out, talking a mile a minute, saying he had no idea what happened and begging me to help. I asked him if he was absolutely sure he hadn't bought anything with a credit card that wasn't his. He swore up and down that he had not. He was adamant. But something about the way he was talking made me suspicious. I have access to his email because, at one point, I helped him set up his account when he was younger. So, I logged in and checked. And there it was. The smoking gun. His entire purchase history, dating back months, all made with my credit card. It wasn't even a few purchases here and there, it was constant. Battle passes, skins, in-game currency, expansion packs. Everything he played had transactions tied to it. I called him back and laid it all out. He immediately backpedaled, saying that maybe he had bought a few things here and there but that he didn't realize he was using my card. I told him that was impossible because he had to actively select a payment method every single time he made a purchase. He knew. He had known all along. That was when my sister got involved. And let me tell you, I was not prepared for the sheer level of denial and hostility that came my way. She was furious. But not at her son. No, she was angry at me. She claimed that I must have added my credit card to his account at some point, that this was all my fault for not removing it, and that I had no right to dispute the charges. She kept saying that if it had been her credit card, she would have gotten alerts. That it was on me for not catching it sooner. Never once did she acknowledge that her son had knowingly spent $1,500 that did not belong to him. I told her that he had stopped asking for purchases because no one had stopped him when he realized he could use my card freely. I reminded her that I had given him a several $100 PlayStation gift card for his birthday that he could have used instead. But instead of taking any responsibility, she accused me of blaming her kid for everything, as if I had somehow forced him to use my card. She said she was going to call PlayStation and try to pay off the balance so he could get his account back. I told her that was her choice, but I wasn't going to pretend that this wasn't theft. Because that is exactly what it was. He knew what he was doing. He just didn't think he would get caught. So now my sister is mad at me. My nephew lost his PlayStation account permanently, and I am out hundreds of dollars because I will likely never recover the full amount that was stolen. And somehow, in all of this, I am being painted as the villain. So, am I the asshole here? Update 1. I thought this was over. I really did. I thought my sister would eventually cool off, my nephew would learn his lesson, and we would all move on. Sure, the whole situation had been a complete disaster, but what else could possibly happen? My nephew lost his PlayStation account permanently, my sister was furious with me, and I had already resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't recover all the money that had been drained from my bank account. It wasn't fair, but it was what it was. As far as I was concerned, the damage had been done, and there was nothing left to do but move forward. But oh, how naive I was. Last night, I sat down to go over my latest bank statement, something that had become a habit ever since the PlayStation mess. After realizing how much money had disappeared from my account without me noticing, I had vowed to be more diligent. I wasn't about to let something like that happen again. So, there I was, scrolling through my transactions, expecting to see nothing but the usual expenses, groceries, bills, subscriptions, when something made my stomach drop. A charge from PlayStation. My body went cold. My heart started pounding in my chest. My mind immediately rejected what I was seeing because it simply wasn't possible. I had cancelled my old card. I had reported the fraud. I had been issued a completely new card with a brand new number. There was no way, no logical way, that another PlayStation charge could be appearing on my statement. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that it had to be some sort of error. Maybe it was a pending transaction from before my old card had been cancelled. Maybe one of the refunds from the chargebacks hadn't fully processed, and this was just some kind of accounting mistake. I even considered the possibility that PlayStation was still sorting through the fraud claims on their end, and this was just a glitch in their system. But then I saw the date. It was a brand new charge. It had happened after I had replaced my card. After I had gone through all the trouble of securing my finances. After I had taken every possible precaution to make sure this exact thing wouldn't happen again. It wasn't an old, lingering issue. It was fresh. It was real. I clicked into the transaction details, my hands shaking slightly as I did. Some desperate part of me still wanted to believe that there would be some kind of reasonable explanation, that I was just overreacting. But the moment I saw the account associated with the charge, every single muscle in my body tensed. It wasn't my nephew's banned account. It was a completely different one. A new wave of panic surged through me, quickly morphing into something far worse, rage. Someone had my new card information. Not my old one. Not some previously saved payment method that had somehow slipped through the cracks. My brand new card, the one I had barely even used. Someone had taken it and manually entered the details. Someone had gone out of their way to get my financial information again and use it for PlayStation purchases. I felt sick. The first time this happened, I had blamed myself. I had told myself that I had been too careless. That I should have been paying closer attention to my statements. That I should have been more aware of where my card details were stored. My nephew had taken advantage of my negligence, and while it was infuriating, it wasn't entirely unexpected. But this? This wasn't just an old payment method sitting in someone's account. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had gone through the effort of obtaining my new card details and entering them manually to make purchases. I picked up my phone and immediately called my bank. I was shaking with frustration as I explained, once again, that there was another fraudulent PlayStation charge on my account. The representative was professional and helpful, but I could hear the unspoken judgment in their voice. Another fraudulent PlayStation charge. After everything I had just gone through. I could practically hear them wondering how I had let this happen again. I told them I had no idea how my new card had been compromised, that I had never once linked it to any PlayStation account. They took down all the information, cancelled my card yet again, and assured me that a new one would be issued. But I wasn't just going to sit there and accept this. I needed answers. I started retracing every step I had taken since receiving my new card. I had barely even used it. The only places I had entered it were trusted services that I had been using for years without issue. It had never touched PlayStation. It had never been linked to any account. There was no way this should have happened. My brain was working overtime, trying to piece together the puzzle, when my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a text message notification. It was from Jason, my nephew's younger brother. It was short. Just one sentence. But the moment I read it, I felt my blood run cold. "Hey, I think I messed up. Update 2. I called Jason right away. The moment he picked up, he sounded nervous, his voice barely above a whisper. The first thing out of his mouth wasn't an apology, wasn't an explanation. It was a plea. "Please don't tell my mom." That alone told me everything I needed to know. I pressed him, demanding to know exactly what he had done and how he had done it. At first, he hesitated, trying to play dumb, acting like he had no idea what I was talking about. But I wasn't in the mood for games. I told him straight up that I already knew the charge had come from a different PlayStation account, that I had already flagged it as fraud, that I wasn't going to let this slide. He could tell me now, or I would go to his mom and tell her myself. That's when he cracked. Piece by piece, the whole story came tumbling out. Apparently, after my nephew had been caught using my card the first time, he hadn't exactly been remorseful. He hadn't learned anything from losing his PlayStation account, from getting banned, from the entire mess that had unfolded. Instead, he had bragged to Jason about how long he had been getting away with it. About how easy it was. About how dumb I had been for not noticing sooner. And Jason? He had listened. He had absorbed every detail like a student taking notes from a seasoned expert. My nephew had taught him exactly how to do it. How to enter card details manually. How to make the purchases blend in so they wouldn't stand out right away. How to save the payment method before the bank could flag anything. And the worst part? Jason had taken his brother's lessons to heart. He had gone ahead and done it himself. It was never a one-time thing. He had been planning to use my card the whole time. He saw it as free money, a loophole, a way to get whatever he wanted without having to ask permission or spend his own allowance. So, as soon as I got my new card, he made sure to grab the details. He saw it in my wallet once, memorized the numbers, and entered them manually when he made a brand new PlayStation account. It was that easy. He had gone on a spree, buying games, in-game currency, whatever he wanted. He didn't stop to think about consequences, didn't stop to consider what would happen if he got caught. His brother had gotten away with it for so long, why wouldn't he? But unlike his brother, Jason had second thoughts. The moment he saw that I had caught the charge so quickly, panic set in. His older brother had been fine until I looked too closely, but Jason had never expected me to be checking my statements so obsessively. He had assumed he would have weeks, months before I noticed anything. Instead, I caught it almost immediately. And now, his stomach was in knots because he knew exactly what was coming next. I was furious. Beyond furious. My nephew hadn't just stolen from me. He had turned it into a skill, a trade, a legacy to be passed down. He had mentored Jason in fraud like some kind of criminal mastermind, and Jason, eager to follow in his brother's footsteps, had jumped right in without a second thought. I didn't care how old they were. This wasn't some innocent mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. And I was done playing nice. I called my sister immediately, convinced that this time, she would have no choice but to take responsibility. Surely, now that both of her kids had been caught red-handed, she would finally see the truth. She would understand how serious this was. She would take action. Oh, how wrong I was. Her response was instant and dismissive. They're just kids. You're the adult. You should have been more careful. I felt my entire body tense with rage. That was it. That was her takeaway. Not that her kids had stolen from me. Not that they had done it twice. Not that they had actively learned how to defraud me and then passed the knowledge down like a family tradition. No. To her, the real issue wasn't what they had done, it was that I had let it happen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She refused to believe that Jason had done anything wrong. She accused me of being dramatic, of making a big deal out of nothing, of blowing this way out of proportion. Kids make mistakes. They don't understand money the way adults do. I should have just locked my card down better. I should have been paying closer attention. It wasn't their fault that I hadn't been more cautious. I shut that conversation down fast. I told her that this wasn't about me being careful. This wasn't about a simple mistake. This was theft. Her kids had knowingly and willingly stolen from me. They weren't confused. They weren't unaware of what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they had done it anyway. She wouldn't hear it. She actually had the audacity to suggest that I must have accidentally given them my new card information at some point. That there was no way Jason had memorized it from my wallet. That this was all just some misunderstanding. I couldn't take it anymore. If she wasn't going to do anything about it, then I was. Update 3. I had no choice. There was no more room for discussion, no more family goodwill, no more trusting that my sister would step up and handle things like a responsible parent. She had made it painfully clear where she stood. This was my fault, not hers. Her kids weren't thieves. They were just kids, and I was the unreasonable one for expecting any sort of accountability. So, I did what I should have done the moment this all started. I filed a formal fraud report with my bank. I laid everything out in detail, from the initial theft by my older nephew to Jason picking up where his brother had left off. I provided every fraudulent charge, every bank statement, and every bit of proof I had. I made it clear that this was not a misunderstanding or an accident. This was theft. Intentional, repeated theft. The moment I submitted the fraud report, I made a decision. No more chances. No more access. No more family trust. My sister and her kids were officially cut off. For years, I had let things slide. I had been the good sibling, the generous uncle, the easygoing one who was always willing to help out. But that goodwill had been exploited, twisted into something ugly. My kindness had been taken as a weakness, my trust as an invitation to be used. That was over. I would never again let myself be put in a position where I had to clean up their mess. A few days later, my phone rang. It was my sister, and she was absolutely livid. At first, I almost didn't answer. I had no interest in dealing with another round of her denial and blame shifting. But something told me this wasn't just another attempt to guilt-trip me. There was something different this time. So, I picked up. The moment I said hello, she was screaming. Her voice was shaking with rage, her words barely coherent as she unloaded on me. She couldn't believe I had reported the charges. She couldn't believe I had gone through with the fraud claim. She was dealing with frozen funds now because, surprise. Her bank account had been flagged too. Because Jason, in all his reckless spending, hadn't just used my card. He had used hers too. The audacity of this child. I could barely process what she was saying at first. Between her shouting and my own disbelief, it took a moment for everything to sink in. Jason had stolen from me, yes, but he hadn't stopped there. He had taken from his own mother, using her credit card the same way he had used mine. And now, because I had reported the fraud, her bank had flagged the transactions on her account as well. Her funds were frozen. She was under investigation. And instead of recognizing the real issue, the fact that her son had stolen from both of us, she was blaming me. It was my fault for reporting it. My fault for not keeping it quiet. My fault for letting it escalate to the point where she was now facing consequences. I had heard enough. I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. If she had actually disciplined her kids instead of defending them, none of this would have happened. Then I hung up. That was it. That was all I had to say. I knew, even before she called, that she wouldn't take any responsibility. That she would twist it around and make it about how unfair it was for her to have to deal with financial stress. But hearing her in real time, screaming at me because she was facing the exact same mess I had been dealing with for weeks, made me realize just how deep her delusion ran. She wasn't upset that her son had stolen from her. She was upset that she had to deal with the fallout. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. A text message. It was from my older nephew. Thanks a lot. That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just pure, entitled bitterness. As if I had done something to him. As if I had wronged him by refusing to let him keep stealing from me. I stared at the message for a long time before making my decision. I blocked his number. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even pretending to be. He had been caught red-handed, lost his account, and instead of accepting responsibility, he had moved on to being bitter that he had gotten caught in the first place. But Jason? Jason was different. I spoke to him separately, and for the first time, I saw something resembling actual guilt. He wasn't defensive like his older brother. He wasn't angry at me for reporting him. He wasn't blaming anyone else. He admitted what he had done. He admitted that he had gotten carried away, that he had known what he was doing was wrong, that he had let the excitement of getting away with it cloud his judgment. It didn't change what had happened, but at least he understood that there were consequences. At this point, though, it was out of my hands. Whether he was sorry or not, the fraud report had been filed. The banks were handling the situation now, and I was done trying to fix what wasn't my responsibility to fix. I had spent too much time being the reasonable one, the forgiving one, the one willing to look past things for the sake of keeping the peace. That time was over. If my sister wanted to believe her kids were innocent, if she wanted to pretend that I was the bad guy for protecting myself, then so be it. She could deal with the consequences. Update 4. I wasn't planning on updating again. As far as I was concerned, the damage had been done, the decisions had been made, and my sister's family was officially out of my life. I had accepted that I was never going to see the money that had been stolen from me. It was gone, written off as a painful lesson about trusting the wrong people. I had moved on, content in the knowledge that I would never allow myself to be put in that position again. But then something happened that I never expected. I actually got my money back. It had been days since I filed the fraud report, and I hadn't thought much about it. My focus was on distancing myself from the mess my sister had created, not on hoping for any kind of resolution. But then an email came in from my bank, and as soon as I saw the subject line, my breath caught in my throat. The fraud case had been fully investigated. Every transaction had been reviewed. And since the purchases were proven to be unauthorized, I was entitled to a full reimbursement. Not just for the most recent charges. Not just for the last few months. The entire $1,500. I read the email twice, then a third time, barely believing it. I had assumed that, at best, the bank might refund some of the more recent transactions, the ones I had caught early. I had prepared myself for the standard corporate response of, "We can't go back too far," or, "There's nothing we can do." But instead, they had gone all the way back. Every single stolen dollar had been restored to my account. And the best part? The bank had placed the financial liability on my sister's account. It turned out that, in her absolute refusal to take responsibility for her kids' actions, she had actually sealed her own fate. When she had called the bank, full of righteous indignation, trying to argue that this was my fault, she had let something slip. She had admitted that she knew her kids had made the purchases. That alone had been enough to change the bank's stance. By acknowledging that she was aware of the transactions but still defending them, she had removed any doubt that this was a case of true fraud. To the bank, this wasn't just some random credit card theft, it was an ongoing issue she had enabled. That was all they needed. The liability was shifted to her. She was the one dealing with chargebacks, with account freezes, with the bureaucratic nightmare that came with contesting fraudulent activity. I didn't even have to fight for it. The very thing she had used to argue against me, that it wasn't a big deal, that she knew about it, was what made her fully responsible in the bank's eyes. A few hours later, she left me a furious voicemail. Her account had been locked, and according to her, the bank wouldn't unfreeze her funds until she paid back the entire amount. She was screaming, practically incoherent with rage, blaming me for everything. As if I had forced her kids to steal. As if I had been the one to repeatedly ignore red flags and refuse to discipline them. As if I had put her in this position, rather than her own failure to parent responsibly. I deleted the voicemail without responding. There was nothing left to say. Later, I heard from a cousin that my sister was still ranting about how I had ruined her finances over some dumb video game charges. Not a single word about the fact that her kids had committed fraud. Not a single acknowledgement that she had refused to do anything about it. To her, I was the villain, the one who had taken things too far, the one who had escalated the situation. She wasn't angry at her kids for stealing. She was angry that they had been caught. That was the moment I knew there was no coming back from this. Cutting her off had been the right decision. As for my nephews, Jason actually reached out again, and this time, it wasn't entitlement or deflection. It was a real apology. He admitted that he had done something awful, that he had gotten carried away, that he had let greed get the better of him. He said he felt guilty, that he regretted what he had done, and that he was being punished for it. Apparently, my sister had finally grounded him, cutting off his internet access for 2 months. At least one of them had learned a lesson. The older one. No such thing. No apology, no guilt, no attempt to make things right. Just another display of entitlement. I found out from that same cousin that he was still angry about losing his PlayStation account, still acting like I had personally ruined his life. As if I had been the one stealing, as if I had been the one to make the decisions that led to his permanent ban. He hadn't learned a thing. I didn't care. He was no longer my problem. I had officially cut contact with my sister and her family. No more favors, no more generosity, no more trust. I had spent too long allowing myself to be used, to be manipulated into playing the role of the easygoing family member who could always be counted on to help out. But hey, at least my bank account is back to normal.